Waking up from the woke. And we have no dumbest bill in America, but we do have a go woke or go broke. And this podcast is called Waking Up from the Woke. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the millennial joining us today is, of course, our producer, Christopher Hopkins. And we have with us a special guest, and he is Brian Chisholm. Welcome, Brian. Brian has been with us before on a different podcast, and that actual podcast was very well listened to. I just want you to know, for a variety of reasons, and made a lot of news. So this podcast is called Waking Up from the Woke, and that is corporations that are finally waking up to the nonsense of the employees that are pushing them in the direction of only engaging in woke business. And now they're waking up and pushing back, which is a good thing. But first up, we have Caitlin for governor of Transylvania. That's a joke. Caitlin for governor of California. So Caitlyn Jenner, of course, which is the former gold medalist Bruce Jenner from 1976. That was actually back when, Jimmy Carter was president? That was, it's hard. It's a long time ago.
Right.
And so Caitlyn Jenner is running for governor of California. It's funny because like a while back, we did a podcast and we were talking about the fact that Caitlyn Jenner had pronounced that she was not going to run for governor of California. And then apparently a few months have passed and now Caitlyn Jenner is running for California governor because she can beat Gavin Newsom. At least that's what Caitlyn says. So Caitlyn went on Sean Hannity recently, and it was a long interview. And we only have a really small clip of this because it is kind of funny for a variety of reasons. But we're going to talk about Caitlyn Jenner with Brian Chisholm, and does she have a chance? And so first up, let's listen to this clip. Here it is.
It's like there's one set of rules for Sacramento, and there's another set of rules for everybody else. I mean, you've seen the video of him at the French Laundry, okay? I can't go down to my restaurant, and all the employees in that restaurant down there are not working, okay? And he's up there dining. We see Nancy Pelosi. I can't go to my hair salon. All the salons in my town are closed. Nobody can go in there. Nobody's working. People are losing money. But she can sneak in.
So, okay, I thought that was funny because of the fact that Caitlyn's like, I can't even go into my hair salon. I mean, when was the last time you heard someone say that? I'm just...
It's so odd because Caitlyn or Bruce, whatever, seem to be so confused about so many other things, but is right about this. This is... The governor is living by a different set of rules.
He is.
But it's tough to, and maybe it's just me, and forgive me for this, but I watched that video and I kept thinking of, first of all, Wheaties, because I remember when Bruce Jenner was competing in 1976.
Explain what that is. Explain.
Well,
it's a cereal.
Right. The Olympics used to market, and if you ate your Wheaties, you had a better chance of being a better athlete and making it to the Olympics. And that's when the Olympics were so important to all of us, because it was the only thing on TV.
And that was the corporate propaganda of Wheaties. We're going to get Bruce Jenner, the gold medalist, to be on the front cover of Wheaties, and we're going to. So go ahead.
And that was such a big honor back then in 1976. If you made the front of Wheaties, and I still see Bruce Jenner's face on there. It's still imprinted on my mind. And when I saw this video, I was just like, I couldn't even hear the words. I was like, I can't believe that is Bruce.
I have to agree.
Caitlyn, she's right. She's right about what. And then my next thought was, are the kids confused about Mother's Day this year? Do they have to? Do we give to both? Or I just don't know.
I mean, so Caitlyn said, she couldn't even go to make an appointment at her hair salon, but Nancy Pelosi just walked into her hair salon during, peak COVID, and that wasn't fair. And so, but I was, of course, waiting to hear something funnier, which is Caitlyn Jenner saying that she couldn't make an appointment at her OBGYN because, but Nancy Pelosi could. We're not going to touch that too much, but...
Yeah.
What's funny about this, podcast listeners? I got to tell you, what's funny about this is Brian and I can joke about this, and because it is funny, and I think it's funny because it enables us to laugh at ourselves and laugh where we are today. I think that's important. Humor is important because a lot of this is so difficult for so many people to fully understand where we've come as a country and as a society. But our podcast producer, he gets really embarrassed and red-faced. Not upset, but a little bit embarrassed because I think that's the whole millennial thing. They they were taught to be very respectful. And I think we're being respectful. I just think at the same time, we're just looking at this going, this is hard for us because we remember Bruce Jenner as this stud, an athlete everybody wanted to be because he was on the box of Wheaties. And now, fast forward to 2021, and Bruce Jenner is a woman, and Bruce Jenner is running for governor of California as a woman and as a Republican, which makes it even funnier. You know?
Espousing conservative views.
And wouldn't it be funny if the nation's first Republican transvestite governor was a Republican? I mean, I'm sorry, but there's something really ironic and funny about this.
We are a big tent.
And meanwhile, the Democrats are having a very difficult time dealing with this because they're like, well, it's not cool because it's a Republican, which shows you that Democrats are freaking out because it's really not about the wokeness. If you're a Democrat, what it really is about is that you want a Democrat to be in. I mean, they don't want a Republican and they want a Democrat in, right?
That is correct. That's 100%
yes.
correct.
And that is Caitlin for governor of Transylvania. So next up, podcast listeners, speaking about Caitlyn Jenner, Caitlyn wants to ban boys competing in girls' sports. Makes perfect sense. Caitlyn Jenner wants to ban boys competing in girls' sports, but apparently it wasn't always that way. At least that's what we're being told. And as you can imagine, the press, the left in the press, which is pretty much the press, their heads are exploding. So Caitlyn Jenner opposes transgender athletes unless they are competing in the sport of their assigned sex at birth. I think that's really what we're talking about here. So more than 30 states are proposing laws that ban trans in girls' sports. So what do you call that? If you're Caitlyn Jenner, is that considered a trans what? Is that a trans guy or a trans? I don't know. What is that considered? Just trans?
Just a trans, I believe.
Okay. See, we're not experts on this. But what we do know is this. More than 30 states are proposing laws saying that boys who are dressed as girls can't compete in girls' sports. And 7 states have actually passed that law. 30 states combined have proposed this law. Makes perfect sense. Here's ABC News reporting on the Idaho Fairness in Sports Act. Here's the clip.
Governors in 7 states have signed bills making it against the law for transgender girls to compete on a public school girls' sports team. Lawmakers arguing that transgender girls and women have an unfair advantage. In March 2020, Idaho's House Bill 500, dubbed the Fairness in Women's Sports Act, banned trans girls and women's ability to compete in female sports leagues.
It's about making sure that we preserve those opportunities.
So I guess they call them trans girls then, at least they do at ABC News. I don't know. To me, it's just trans because I think it's safer to do that because then you can say, well, there is someone who is trans who's competing in girls' sports. By definition, I think that means, well, it's really a guy, at least biologically a guy, which is really what matters, and that guy is competing in girls' sports. Well, Idaho has passed the Fairness in Sports Act saying no more of that. You must compete in the sport in which you are, in which your sex was assigned at birth. Makes perfect sense. Well, Caitlyn Jenner commented on this trans sports matter. She kind of had a hit job of a reporter come up to her as she was getting into her vehicle in California because now Caitlyn Jenner is running for governor of California. So the reporter did the hit job and is like, oh, by the way, what do you think about trans in sports? Caitlyn Jenner had a response, and here's that clip.
So there's legislation in various states to ban biological boys who are trans from playing girls' sports in school. What's your opinion on that?
Question of fairness. That's why I oppose biological boys who are trans competing in girls' sports in school. It just isn't fair. And we have to protect girls' sports in our school. But
isn't that something? I mean, that's an incredible turnaround because, and as you can imagine in California when you're running for governor, Brian, the citizens of California on the left, the wokeness crowd, they're going crazy. They're going crazy because it's like, wait a minute, it's not enough that you should be able to just be trans and that the government should pay for your transition. That's not enough. We actually want you to compete in the other sex's sport.
And the thing is, we went through this painstaking process a while ago of passing all the Title IX stuff because we wanted more females to have the opportunity to get scholarships in college, and we wanted to make sure that they were They were singled out to make sure that we were putting resources towards these sports to get more participation. If you allow biological males who identify as females, it then starts to push out all of these individuals that we produce Title IX for.
Yes.
So
Yes.
now, I mean, theoretically, you could have transgender male females dominating all of the female sports, and all the females are now on the sideline saying, well, Caitlin, who used to be Bruce, has taken my spot on the field, and now we have a whole field full of Caitlins, and all the females are no longer playing, and Title IX is worthless.
That's exactly what is happening and is going to happen, which is why 30 states are proposing laws to ban that. So here's ABC News, which is totally triggered by Caton's apparently reversal on this subject. And ABC News shows some footage of Caitlin at some ESPN Awards ceremony. And we had that clip, and here it is.
It's a dramatic shift for Jenner, a transgender woman and advocate.
I also want to acknowledge all the young trans athletes who are out there, given the chance to play sports as who they really are.
So that's what Caitlyn Jenner said at that ESPN event, that people should be able to play sports as who they really are, which I presume means whatever you're feeling that day, that's the sport that you should be able to compete in. But now Caitlyn Jenner running for governor is saying, no, you must only play the sport that your birth assigned you in, I guess. Is that the best way to put it?
As God created you, I believe.
As God, yeah, that's much better. Thank you, Brian. See,
Brian, innie or outie, whatever that is.
So Brian Chisholm actually serves in the Maryland House of Delegates, and he serves on the Health and Government Operations Committee, so he hears bills like this all of the time. So he's much better able to, I think, articulate these difficult subject matters because, of course, but here's the thing, when you're a Republican, I think you should have the freedom to really just talk about the issues in an honest way. But Democrats can't. They have these really strict speech codes about trans sports and trans, don't they? It's like they're really strict speech codes. And don't they get upset when you talk about...
Yeah, it's difficult because it seems like the rules are changing, and what offends them changes every day. And you don't know, can I say he? Can I say she? Can I say us? Can I say them? And then this alphabet of different letters that we're now putting into the code, that LGBTQ, and then there's something else added now, and I was really unaware of what that one was, and I think it was...
There's a plus sign at one point.
Yeah, undetermined. I mean... Prince did this a while ago and didn't want to be called a name, he just wanted to be a symbol. So I think we're just calling it symbols and letters.
Well, the plus sign, too, I guess, makes you safe, right? Because you say plus, and that's like, plus infinity,
Right.
Infinity and beyond. We're not really sure what's possible. Yeah, so.
And I think it's safe to say that you and I are never looking to offend anybody. We're just trying to speak fact and truth. And sometimes you fall into a trap, even though you had no ill intent at all, by using the wrong pronoun or the wrong letter.
Exactly. And that's why we're calling this podcast Waking Up from the Woke, because it just seems like people are beginning to wake up and just say, you know what, let's just talk like we're human beings again and Americans again and stop being offended with everything. And so we have this segment, we're going to call it Focus on Work and Not Woking. Focus on work, not woking. What does that mean? Well, there's this software company called Basecamp, podcast listeners, and Basecamp has seen a mass employee exodus after the CEO of Basecamp, the software company, has banned discussions about politics on the Basecamp campus. So that was quite a mouthful. So here's what they're saying in TechCrunch magazine. Following a controversial ban on political discussions earlier this week, Basecamp employees are heading for the exits. The company employs around 60 people, and roughly a third of the company appears to have accepted buyouts to leave, many citing new company policies. On Monday, Basecamp CEO Jason Fried announced in a blog post that employees would no longer be allowed to openly share the societal and political discussions at work. Every discussion, quote, remotely related to politics, advocacy, or society at large quickly spins away from pleasant, Fried wrote. You shouldn't have to wonder if staying out of it means you're complicit, or wading into it means you are a target. Basecamp's departures are significant according to Twitter posts. Basecamp's head of design, head of marketing, head of customer support will all depart. The company's iOS team also appears to have quit en masse, and many departing employees have been with the company for years. So here's one of the employees, Zach Wall, tweeted, "After 7 years, today is my last day at Basecamp. I plan on taking a little time off, but if anyone is looking for an iOS engineer, I would love to chat. My DMs are open." And then Andy Digarosi wrote, also an employee, "I resigned today from my role as head of marketing at Basecamp due to recent changes and new policies. I'll be returning to entrepreneurship. My DMs are open." And of course, new policies. And then Sam Stevenson, "As a result of the recent changes at Basecamp today, it's my last day at the company. I joined over 15 years ago as a junior programmer, and I've been involved with nearly every project launched there since 2006. So you see the point here. This is focus on work, not woking, and you have the CEO saying, look, this discussion of politics in the company and is driving the company under, and it's really focusing on things that's wasting our time. We're actually here to develop software products. We are not here to discuss politics." Thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I think what will start to happen is I think some of these people that leave Basecamp will become entrepreneurs, and they'll start to work on their own, and they'll start to build a company, and they're going to find the same problems are going to pop up at their door. Your job as a CEO is like running a football team. You're trying to build a team where everybody's moving in the same direction. And when you interject politics into anything, you're going to divide people up, and sooner or later, you're going to have a very dysfunctional workplace where people hate each other, people don't like to talk to each other, and nothing productive is coming out of that workplace. So I understand why he put this in place. There's nothing positive that comes out of people arguing over politics all day long while they're supposed to be producing a good or a service.
Brian, that's a really good point, because what you're saying is that if you're a CEO of a company and the company is just over the top woke, at least the company employees, then what ends up happening is your company is kind of divided, because clearly not everybody believes in the same philosophy. But yet, of course, in Silicon Valley, people are expected to believe the same thing. And when you don't have people that believe the same thing, and the CEO is like, well, enough of this wokeness, we're not here for that purpose. And then you have people who are like, well, that's not fair. You know, I came here to be able to advance my social agenda. No, dude, you're here on a job. You're being paid for the job. Do the damn job. And if you want to do the other stuff, the other political stuff, when you go home and you're not on the job, that's when you can get involved in politics. I mean, that's usually the way it happened.
And political discussion or political debate now always turns into personal destruction of somebody else's. What it always ends up being.
So true.
And there's nothing positive comes out of you're going to try to make somebody else the villain. And there's no way that you can work together at that point, because you hate them and everybody's either a racist or a sexist or a homophobe or whatever it may be, is what it all turns into. And now you have this big divided company that is going to become probably broke or bankrupt.
So CEO Jason Fried also said, according to the Daily Wire, "We make project management, team communication, and email software. We don't have to solve deep social problems, chime in publicly whenever the world requests our opinion on the major issues of the day, or get behind one movement or another with time or treasure. These are all important topics, but they're not our topics at work." I mean, ladies and gentlemen, podcast listeners, I got to tell you, this is the perfect focus on work and not woking. I mean, I have never heard a CEO do this before, especially at a tech company where obviously most of the employees are far, far left and progressive. I mean, final thoughts on this segment.
Yeah, I think that he's got a serious problem on his hand. I think he's got a real solution, and hopefully he can fill it with people that are looking to work and not just promote woke.
Exactly. So next up, podcast listeners, Woca-Cola lawyer resigns. That's right, Woca-Cola lawyer. That's, of course, Coca-Cola, but we call them Woca-Cola because of their involvement in the huge scandal in Georgia. If you want to call it a scandal, it's really not, about requiring photo ID in Georgia. And Coca-Cola got involved. And of course, it's the super woke corporation, and they've decided to just engage in all kinds of political issues. Well, Coca-Cola has paused their aggressive diversity plan after their chief lawyer resigns. And here's what it says. Coca-Cola has paused its controversial diversity plan that included penalties on outside law firms if they failed to meet racial diversity quotas. after an intense backlash. So let me explain what that just said. It said that Coca-Cola has an in-house counsel, right? Their chief attorney. And he was required by the CEO of Coca-Cola and their diversity team to when he outsourced legal work to law firms, he sent work to outside law firms that are not part of Coca-Cola, independent law firms. He had to tell them that they must meet diversity quotas in their hiring in order for them to do work for Coca-Cola. And so the law firms were like, well, who the hell do you think you are telling us who we can and can't hire? We're here to do a good job for you with respect to legal counsel. And so this top lawyer has resigned. And so the pause comes after the orchestrator of the plan, Coke's former general counsel, Bradley Gayton, abruptly resigned last month after less than a year on the job as criticism of the quotas mounted, a quota system. Some question whether Gayton's policies violated Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which of course it does, which says employers can't treat people differently based on their race. Scott Leith, a spokesman for Coke, said Gayton's replacement, Monica Howard Douglas, is now reviewing the plan to see if they want to continue. When there is a leadership change, quote, it takes time for the new leader to review the current status of the team, organization, and initiatives, he said. Monica is fully committed to the notions of equity and diversity in the legal profession, and we fully expect she will take the necessary to thoughtfully review and plans going forward. And so that, of course, is Coca-Cola lawyer resigns because there's pushback in this major corporation over the craziness that has nothing to do with selling a product or making a product.
I look at stories like this and I wonder what Martin Luther King Jr. would have thought, who said, I want to be judged for the content of my character, not the color of my skin. And I think this is the soft bigotry of low expectations, that we aren't looking for you to bring your talents or your education or your experience to the marketplace. We want you to hire based on somebody's skin or somebody's ethnic makeup.
Yes.
Which is in total contradiction of what he viewed, what he believed, and what he wanted. And when we start to enact these type of policies in companies to say, well, you're going to have to do this or they're never going to make it, that's a slap in the face to people, in my opinion. And I think it goes to show their conscious decision that maybe they are better than those people, and that's what they believe, and they're wrong. I think that upward mobility can be accomplished by everybody, regardless of their race, creed, or color. And to put these type of plans in place, especially in a company like Coca-Cola, where there has been a huge backlash. I mean, the Major League Baseball almost takes an all-star game out of Georgia, where 52% of Atlanta is black.
Yes, exactly. Who is it hurting?
Yeah, exactly.
It's not hurting anybody except the wrong people. You're hurting the people that you're saying that you want to help. And so if you want to, moreover, Morning Joe on MSNBC, they went forward with Mitch McConnell and showed a clip of Mitch McConnell warning big companies to stay out of politics. And it's really kind of interesting. No matter what you think about Mitch McConnell, it's kind of odd when you think about it that any kind of politician would ever have to say this in America, which is, why are you so involved, not just in politics of the issues of the day, but internally yourself? You actually have people working on political issues and political matters on the infrastructure inside of your company, and it's blowing your company up. Right. It's not just blowing the country up, it's blowing your company up. So here's that clip.
And more politics now. We've been talking the past few weeks about the GOP's new love-hate relationship with big business, a fight that Senator Mitch McConnell picked with companies last month.
I found it completely discouraging to find a bunch of corporate CEOs getting in the middle of politics. My advice to the corporate CEOs of America is to stay out of politics. Don't pick sides in these big fights.
He did back off of those comments a little bit later. It looks, though, like the rift between big business and the GOP, though, is growing wider.
So look, MSNBC did get one thing right there, which is hard to believe, on Morning Joe. They got right this battle that's occurring now within the Republican Party and this whole Coca-Cola thing, which is the Republican Party is increasingly the party of the blue collar, man and woman. It is not the party of big business. And the Democrat Party has become the party of big business. And so it's really funny because MSNBC is trying to play the whole game. Well, there's a rift in the Republican Party about big business. It's like, yeah, increasingly you have the Mitch McConnells of the world and the Bushes of the world and smaller groups of people that are about big business in the Republican Party. And then you have the growing part of the party, which are, in my opinion, the individuals who are blue collar, who see it as a way to fight for fairness in America. And want an opportunity for companies to come back to this country and actually grow the country and grow the American dream. What are your thoughts on that?
I think to put it more simply, they're not for big business, they're for big donors. And that's the bottom line. It's all about the money. It's always about the money. They're going to protect the ones that are writing the big checks. And I agree with you. The Republican Party, or the conservative part of the Republican Party, is still the party of Main Street, where they have become the party of Wall Street. The Democrats have always been the party of Wall Street. And the thing about Wall Street is they have these huge marketing firms that know how to push a certain agenda and a certain product. Do you know who the most marketed demographic in America is today?
Who?
18 to 34. You know why? They're the most gullible. And that's why they know this. And this is how they drive their narrative. This is how they start to push more and more
Those
people.
are more or less the millennials, by the way, just saying, mostly skewed in the 22 to 34 range, yes.
But that's why they do it, and that's the whole woke thing. It's about marketing an idea to this demographic and having them push it out, and knowing that it has a dramatic effect on other companies and finances. And it's a dangerous game to be playing, especially as any business. When you get in the middle of a political debate or insert your opinion, only bad's going to come. It's very few stories of you interjecting your political opinion and your company doing much better after that.
It's really interesting because we see it, of course, here in Maryland. I know other people across the country see it, where you have this internal battle because you'll meet the country club Republican, and you'll think to yourself, I'm glad that I'm on the same side of them on the one hand. On the other hand, we really don't agree on a lot of issues, always, because we don't believe, for example, in giving special tax credits to these big corporations. And the country club Republicans are really all about that. And that's where they agree with the Democrats in many cases. And I know, you're a blue collar Republican, I'm a blue collar Republican, and that is defined as where you came from and how you were raised. And it really, I think, roots you in a different manner of thinking when you do get elected and you engage with these big corporations, as well as small companies and so forth. I mean, yes, you want their support, but what you want is fairness. And they don't really necessarily want fairness anymore. They just want to play politics and be in control.
I think you're absolutely right. My dad was a bricklayer, which made me a brick carrier, I guess. And I learned a lot on the job site. To be on a construction site and to be in a small business, you learn so much, and you get to meet a lot of different people with different views, but you find out you have a lot in common. Most people have a lot of things in common, but small business is really the heartbeat of America, and that's really who we should be fighting for, because when something bad happens like the coronavirus, guess who got punched in the mouth all week and twice on Sunday? The small businesses without these huge lobbying firms like these big tech businesses we're talking about right here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is Coca-Cola, lawyer resigns. So next up, podcast listeners, the press laughs at the Pentagon press secretary. So the press had, the press corps was at, of course, the Pentagon. And the Pentagon, a lot of people don't know this, the Pentagon has a press secretary. And at the Pentagon, the press secretary will have, of course, various press conferences, for lack of a better term, at the Pentagon to discuss issues that relate to the military and that relate to the U.S. engagement overseas. And that's important, right? It's important to know what's going on with the Pentagon and where they're engaging and where they're disengaging and whether there are new weapons programs and how those are working. That's the purpose of course, the Pentagon press secretary. So a reporter at the press conference that just occurred, a reporter asks a question. And it's a really interesting question. And it's kind of funny. And first up, we have the question, and then we'll give you the response. Here's the question.
Question. An Army major was reportedly drugged and bitten by strippers in Poland. Will that affect the U.S. military's footprint in that country?
So an Army major was reportedly bitten and drugged by a stripper.
No, because I missed this too. It says stripper, so it's plural. So there was more than one stripper.
Can we play that again? Yeah. We're going to hear this again. All right.
Question. An Army major was reportedly drugged and bitten by strippers in Poland. Will that affect the U.S. military's footprint in that country?
So strippers are working together now, at least.
And will that...
Maybe they have a union in Poland.
Will that affect the footprint? Okay. We have the response from the press secretary in the Pentagon, and here it is.
It is a major story, and it happened in Gdansk.
Jeff, I don't know anything about that story. I'll have a look at it. I'm not going to take that question. But
please take that.
Jeff, no, Jeff, just let me state clearly we have a strong military relationship with Poland, and we expect to see that continue to grow and to improve. But I don't know anything about this particular item.
So the relationship with Poland is going to grow and improve. I thought that was probably not the best use of words after the event that actually happened in Poland. But the press secretary said he hadn't heard that. I'm pretty sure he's probably heard that particular story happened.
I'm sure they're fully aware of whatever happened, but it is a dangerous situation at times because now they could use this Army major and extort him for information or whatever. So I'll be honest with you, I've never read the whole story. I'm gonna have to go back and read this story to find out how many strippers, one, two, did they leave him somewhere, or did he voluntarily complain to somebody that last night I was drugged and bitten by strippers? Because I think that's the kind of thing you might want to just put in your back pocket.
Yeah, because you would think his superior officers would say, well, where were you when that happened? And then it's like, then that goes down the rabbit hole of, well, never mind, did I really say that? I really have nothing to report. But it's just really kind of interesting that you have the reporter ask this question and the press secretary is like, well, I mean, we have a strong relationship with Poland and we're not going to withdraw anytime soon.
I guess the big question is, was Hunter with him?
That's right.
Hunter would have told him who to avoid.
Was if only Hunter. Let's wait a minute. Let's patch in Hunter. Hello, Hunter. Can you give us some information on this? Is this a thing? Yeah. So that is the press laughs at Pentagon press secretary. So next up, podcast listeners, vaccine passports, but no voter ID. So there are many states and many governors and many politicians, quite frankly, across this great country who think that vaccine passports should be required. But it's interesting that the same people that think vaccine passports should be required don't support voter ID. And of course, what is a vaccine passport? Brian, what is a vaccine passport?
It's a little card that will verify that you've gotten your vaccine shots, either the Moderna, the Pfizer, or the Johnson & Johnson, and that will allow you then to travel into their state so you can prove that you've been vaccinated and you're healthy and you're not going to hurt anybody, I guess, is what really... My big question for this is always the same. If you have 100% faith in the vaccine, why do you care what anybody else does? I'm assuming the people that want to put these policies into effect have had their vaccine shots, so they should be in the clear and shouldn't have to worry about anything. This is as scary to me as the Caitlyn Jenner story. I mean, we've come so far when we're starting to stop interstate commerce or interstate travel and saying you have to meet these requirements in order to come into our state. And this is one of those things that can get really dangerous for a lot of citizens who believe in freedom still and think, well, I don't trust the vaccine and I'm already healthy or I've already had the coronavirus. I'll do my own research and I'll make my own decisions on this. And when we start to enact these type of things, it really starts to stomp down on people's freedoms, and it gives an ever-growing government even more power over your life. And I am certainly not in favor of any of that.
That's a great way to frame it. So the New York Times, of course, just put out an article entitled, "Coming Soon, the Vaccine Passport." In the near future, travel may require digital documentation showing that passengers have been vaccinated or tested for the coronavirus. Answers to your questions. And it just goes on with all these different points and questions. But of course, you know, when the New York Times puts this in the paper, it's because they're actually advocating for it, which of course they were. And it just proves that this is a problem. And in Slate magazine, another article, the Constitution requires the U.S. to offer vaccine passports. That's the title. The Constitution requires the United States to offer vaccine passports. Now, of course, Slate isn't saying require, but it says to offer. But the thing is if you are offering a vaccine passport, then by definition, what you're doing is separating people into groups. Because then you get into groups, and we all know who those groups already are. It's probably slightly down ideological lines. Someone says, well, before I come in to your restaurant, do you require vaccine passports? Because otherwise I may not go into your restaurant. Or before I meet you at your office, do you have a vaccine passport? Because I do, and if you don't have one, I'm not going to come meet you. What are your thoughts on this? Because does the vaccine work or doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's the question. I think it's still a huge variable to find out how effective the vaccine is going to be. We don't know. We might not know for years how effective it really was. And I think it's, once again, this is just another product of trying to divide people and picking winners and losers. And what the Constitution really says in the Bill of Rights is it's our rights as free citizens. What are our rights against the government, to protect us from the government? This is in 180 degrees out of phase of what the Constitution was really written for and what the Bill of Rights were written for. It is for us as free people to form the type of government we want and for us to protect our own liberties and freedoms. This, according to the New York Times, the government's really supposed to be the one telling you what to do and how to live your life and what shots to put in your arm. And
yeah, exactly. And the thing is, if you don't, see, here's my problem. If you have all of your family members get the vaccine, and they do so voluntarily, but you choose at your own will to not get it, the only person really using the science that you're putting at risk is yourself.
Right.
Now, if you really believe in science and you're a Democrat, and you really believe in science and you're a Republican, what I just said is completely true, because you and you alone are putting yourself at risk.
That's right.
And you were also, okay, so fine. You could add to that, you're putting other people at risk who also have not been vaccinated, who also have chosen not to have been vaccinated. And so all of those people you can put in one basket and say, okay, this is a personal decision that they have made, and that's fine. They've made it, and they believe that they are low risk even if they get coronavirus. Yet we have these people over here who are saying, no, vaccine passports for everybody. And it's just, to me, I actually see this happening a lot sooner, especially under the Biden administration, than we might think.
Yeah, this is where I hope that some of the states do rely on their own states' rights, because I know, like, Governor DeSantis in Florida has already signed. He said we're not gonna allow this in our state. And my question has always been, if the vaccine is so effective and so precious, and I'm not saying it's not, why do we have some governors, let me think of one, oh yeah, our governor, paying employees to go get the vaccine? You would think that people would be lining up for miles to get the vaccine.
Our governor's paying employees?
You didn't see this. He put a tweet out. He's going to pay the state employees $100 to get the vaccine and keep up with their booster shots. And they're going to check on the booster shots. And if you didn't get your booster shots, then you have to send the $100 back.
So this is Governor Hogan of Maryland who tweeted this, and a booster shot is what, the second vaccine?
A booster shot, and it can be the shingles shot.
Okay, I got you.
I think it's his way of saying, we're going to make sure you're vaccinated for everything. So you got to get the coronavirus vaccine, and then you got to get the booster shot. But we're going to pay him $100. So that's brilliant. We already gave him $1,000. Now we're going to give him $100 to go get this magical shot where they can walk in any Walgreens, CVS, wherever they want for right now. But now we're incentivizing them to go even faster, I guess.
But isn't this kind of creepy that it makes you, look, for me, obviously we have all been trained, at least, especially people who are conservatives, and this is completely true. We're always trained and brought up to be suspicious of government. Right. And Democrats, I believe, embrace government in a very different way than we do. And so if a government says we're going to pay you to get a vaccine, it makes you wonder, one of two things. Why are they paying you to get the vaccine? And number two, what is it about this virus that the government isn't telling us that they feel like it's absolutely necessary to pay people to get the vaccine?
That's a great question. And it's funny how we've come throughout history. You know, in the 60s when the flower power came along, they were the whole point of the flower power was to question government. Now they just all go along like a bunch of sheep and say, all right, this makes sense, where none of it really makes sense. Wear masks outside, take this vaccine, or you can't come into our state. It's almost as if we could have gone back 30 years and then fast forward 30 years, we wouldn't believe we were here.
That is so true. I can't imagine 30 years ago thinking that this was possible, whether it be Caitlyn Jenner, Bruce Jenner running for governor, or there being a passport in order to be able to go between states potentially, and or being able to work or meet people at work or actually show up at work or go to a university. I mean, one university in the state of Maryland, College Park, which is the state's flagship university, says that you can't attend classes in College Park and or live there unless you have the vaccine. That is a requirement right now. Right? It's already there. So that's a de facto passport because, by the way, how would you prove that you had the vaccine? You need a passport to prove it by definition. And so this segment's called Vaccine Passports, but no voter ID. So what about the voter ID part, right? And they are connected because we have the left saying passports must be required. You must have gotten the vaccine, but no voter ID. That's not required. You need a vaccine to meet me, but you don't need a voter ID to vote. Fine. So Governor DeSantis signed an election reform bill, podcast listeners, and that just happened today. We have that clip, and here it is.
We're making sure we're enforcing voter ID. Look, you have to show a picture ID to do all these other things in society, clearly voting. We're also banning ballot harvesting. We're not going to let political operatives go and get satchels of votes and dump them in some drop box. We're also prohibiting mass mailing of balloting. We've had absentee voting in Florida for a long time. You request a ballot, you get it, and then you can mail it in. But to just indiscriminately send them out is not a recipe for success. We're increasing transparency even better. In Florida, we track the votes coming in real time. Not the results, but we know who's voting, what your registration is, and we follow the turnout. So then when the election's over, we know the universe of votes that have been cast, and it makes it so that someone can't dump 100,000 votes 2 or 3 days later. And then finally, we're prohibiting private money from basically running the elections, like these Zuckerbucks that they were doing in all these different parts of the country.
What about?
So this?
Yes, so there you have the governor of Florida saying you have to have voter ID and we're not going to allow ballot harvesting. And that same governor, by the way, in a different press conference said there aren't going to be vaccine passports. If you've been vaccinated, and the governor does say you should be vaccinated, this is the governor of Florida, he's saying, but if you aren't vaccinated, you're not going to be required to have a vaccine, because if you are vaccinated, you have nothing to worry about, because by definition, start living your life the way you always do. And then he mentions this thing called Zuckerbucks, which I find really interesting because this goes to voter ID. And I had to look this up, and that's a thing. So the Daily Signal did an article. It's called Zuckerbucks in Pennsylvania Reveal Impact of Corporate Influence on Elections. All eyes were on Pennsylvania during the days of ballot counting following the November presidential election, as allegations and rumors of voting irregularities spread like wildfire. While the results ultimately were upheld, distrust in our representative government remains as deep and does a deep suspicion that elected leaders are legitimate. Before the next election, Pennsylvania needs to look into ways the state can protect its elections, restore confidence, and avoid this turmoil in the future. A recent poll by Opportunity Solutions Project reveals several common sense steps, and it goes on to explain those steps. But then it says the money that found its way into the Pennsylvania election came from Zuckerberg. So it says during the last election cycle, Zuckerberg Initiative, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, founded by Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg and his wife Priscilla Chan, thus the name Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, gave the Center for Tech and Civil Life more than $350 million to award grants to local governments as a way of allegedly helping counties and municipalities run their elections safely during the COVID-19 pandemic. This money, which the Foundation for Government Accountability has dubbed Zuckerbucks, was supposed to help with pandemic-related expenses, including personal protective equipment. So that is what Zuckerbucks are. And then DeSantis just referenced that in his press conference that you just heard when he signed this new election reform bill. And so he's basically saying Zuckerbucks and the equivalent of Zuckerbucks by corporate America cannot be permitted. They cannot be used in local governments to assist in any way in elections because obviously there's an agenda.
Yeah, is it too big of a leap to say that this is Facebook buying an election?
Yes.
And the problem is when you start to implement cash Zuckerbucks into one state, it affects all 50 states. It can tip a national election. And this is why business, just like in the earlier story, should not be interjecting their opinion, their money, their thoughts into actual elections in a way that we're basically paying people to I guess, roll out your influence and your thought process.
Exactly. And it's just so fascinating to me that there's still even an argument that we need voter ID, especially after the Zuckerbucks fiasco in Pennsylvania and elsewhere. And then at the same time, these idiots at Facebook are saying, and they're advocating for this, vaccine passports, because you will never be able to post something on Facebook right now that questions the coronavirus vaccine.
That's right.
Or questions the data, or any way questions anything about the conventional wisdom of COVID. Facebook will take it down. I mean, they will take you down. They'll take you out. But at the same time, they don't want voter ID. They want to. So this is just, to me, this is a really fascinating subject, and it tells you where we are in America. Final thoughts on this segment.
Once again, this is a slap in the face. This is one of the biggest insults that you can lay on, because we always hear the reason we can't have voter ID because it's going to suppress the vote of the minorities or the black community. And I don't know about you, but I've yet to meet a minority or a black person that doesn't have an ID.
Exactly. Maybe we should require vaccine passports when you vote.
Well,
that's a joke, by the way.
Cut
That's
that
a
out,
joke.
because they're going to think it's the conservatives not getting vaccines, and they're going to push that now. I mean, that is a slippery slope. What are we going to ask for next? You look like you're overweight. You can't come in our state. You have to go home and eat vegetables for a while before you can come in.
That's right. You're a meat eater.
That's right.
You're contributing to climate change. You need a passport.
You smell like cow. You can't come in here.
And that's vaccine passports, but no voter ID. So next up, podcast listeners, we have Go Woke or Go Broke. We have to get music for that at some point. So we have Go Woke or Go Broke, and it's Facebook continues their Trump ban. Of course, because Facebook is probably the most woke corporation in America, and they have banned Donald Trump, and they decided to re-look at the issue, if you will, to revisit the issue, better term, and they revisited it. And what did they decide to do? Well, we're going to continue to ban Donald Trump. So in the Daily Wire, it says, Facebook's oversight board are feckless bureaucrats doing nothing but wasting time as our freedom of speech is taken away. And here's what they say. On Wednesday, Facebook's oversight board, I'm sure they're all probably like 15 years old, announced that, unsurprisingly, they were upholding the big tech giant's deep, controversial decision to suspend former President Donald Trump's accounts on both Facebook and Instagram. The board has upheld Facebook's decision on January 7th, 2021 to restrict then-President Donald Trump's access to posting content on his Facebook page and Instagram account, a statement read. Facebook's oversight board found that the two posts by Mr. Trump on January 6th severely violated Facebook's community standards and Instagram's community guidelines, claiming that phrases like, "We love you," "You're very special," "Great patriots," and "Remember this day forever" had violated Facebook's rules prohibiting praise or support of people engaged in violence. You have to remember, of course, podcast listeners, on January 6th, there were probably, 200,000-300,000 people that were in downtown Washington, D.C., and there was a small minority of people who broke into the Capitol. I'm pretty sure the President of the United States was referring to the people who were actually at the rally and peacefully protesting the way the election was conducted in 2020. I have no doubt about that. But if you have a doubt about that, Facebook, then why don't you ask Donald Trump to rephrase what he meant, give him that opportunity, and ask him what he would put to rephrase it so that he can repost it and say, look, I was talking about my supporters and the idea and the uniquely American concept of peaceful protest, and then have him reinstated. But no, Facebook doesn't want to do that. They want to find every reason they can to not reinstate him. It's just so obvious. Thoughts on this, Brian?
Well, this is, at the very bottom line, this is just a banning of any debate. It's the banning of any other opinion. I think Facebook's big overarching thought on this is we're going to have the last word. We're going to call him an insurrectionist, or he's was the worst man that's ever been in the White House.
A rogue president.
Right. We're not going to let him defend himself with his own words and his own thoughts and his own definition. And I've heard him, as well as you and myself have said, not a single conservative, nor do we condone the violence at the Capitol that day. Matter of fact, it was the worst thing that we could have ever seen. But the vast, vast majority of the people there were there to show support and to peacefully protest.
And I know many of them.
Right. And now Facebook just doesn't want that to be. They want to deliver their own opinion on this and not have somebody come back and deliver their opinion on it. And that's communism right there. That is,
of course,
one voice, no debate. This is what we say. And I mean, I think it's safe to say that the Democrat Party is motivated by fear.
Oh my gosh, yes.
We're more voted by freedom and opportunity, and they fear Donald Trump speaking. That's the bottom line. They don't want him to ever be heard again, because 74 million people still voted for that man. At least 74 million, because that's not even that debate. They'll acknowledge that. It's just that somehow Biden, staying in his basement, got 6 million more than that somehow. I don't know.
So imagine this group of people at Facebook, and they decide, well, we're afraid, and I agree with you, Brian, they're terrified of what he might say. But I wanted to clarify what I just said before to all podcast listeners. Because we live in Maryland, which for the most part is a suburb of Washington, D.C., because it's a small state, we have to say this. We know a lot of people who were there on January 6th. By there, I don't mean breaking into the Capitol. I know no one who broke into the Capitol. I'm talking about people who were there, and they were protesting peacefully in support of Donald Trump, and protesting peacefully in opposition of the way the election was conducted in 2020. And that is a perfectly legitimate thing to do, no matter who you support or oppose. And when you talk to those people, they're like, I didn't even know any of that stuff was happening. That's right. Because that's how many people were there. And yet, Facebook, of course, doesn't want to give anyone a second chance. And so this is really important stuff, because MSNBC is still talking about this, because that's the only way they can try to bounce their ratings up, because their ratings are completely as low. They've been lower than I think they've ever been, ever since Trump left office. So MSNBC, of course, agrees with the ban, and they had an expert panel on recently. And this professor, Jen Gobeck, who's a professor at the University of Maryland. Why do they use Maryland? Because, of course, at the University of Maryland, it's very liberal, very progressive, and it's also really close to Washington, D.C., where MSNBC, of course, has many of its studios. So they had this University of Maryland professor who is a professor at the Maryland College of Information Studies. I'm not sure what that has to do with anything. But they asked her question about the ban. And listen to this insult that she gives. Here's the clip.
Professor Goldbeck, let me start with you, only because the response to the Facebook decision, wherever you stand on this issue, by some Republicans has been that it is a violation of the First Amendment. That, on its face, is not true.
No, I'm always astonished, even though they have pushed this narrative really since Trump started running for president, that they think somehow having a private platform adhere to their own terms of service somehow violates the Constitution. Of course, that's not how it works. We're all held with those terms of service that we agree to follow the rules that the platform set forth. There's a lot of things you're not allowed to say on those platforms that the government would never regulate because of the First Amendment. But it sounds good, and it really appeals to people who have a kind of elementary school level understanding of what free speech means.
So there you go. Jen Goldbeck, professor at the University of Maryland, thinks you're too stupid because you've only got like an elementary school understanding of what free speech means. When, of course, what she's doing is forgetting some really important information. And here's some of that information, Brian, namely that Facebook, because of its power and size, has managed to run almost every major newspaper out of business, because Facebook has become a de facto newspaper, as well as a de facto radio station and television station, and you name it, an information sharing organization. And as a result, Facebook is a utility because it's so big, so powerful, run its competitors out of business, including the print media. And so her point is, it doesn't really apply to them because they're just like this little tiny company that really isn't hurting anyone, when in fact, of course, they have so much control over what is said and what is heard that they, of course, are utility and should be, of course, heavily regulated and maybe even broken up. Thoughts?
I would agree with you. And they receive millions upon billions of dollars in federal subsidies. So they're being funded in part by the federal government, and then they're going out and shutting down any opposition view to the party that they tend to side with, which is always the left, the most progressive Democrats they can. So their idea is we'll use the federal money to shut the voices of anybody in opposition of our team. So now we're going once again to just one voice can never be heard.
Absolutely. And Facebook, of course, it's really interesting how Zuckerberg has done this. He has this little group of 15-year-olds, as I like to call them, who are making the decision as to who gets, of course, banned and who gets shadow banned. And at the same time, Zuckerberg just stands above Facebook as like, oh, they're all making the decisions. I have nothing to do with it. And of course, meanwhile, it's like, well, that's really hard to believe, right? Because Zuckerberg used Zuckerbucks in the 2020 election with his wife and put $350 million into influencing the outcome of the election. And I have no doubt influenced the outcome of the election in all of the swing states, resulting in a Joe Biden presidency. That I have no doubt about. So is there any question that this company's too big and too powerful? I mean, so when they engage in censorship, is there any question this is a problem? Final thoughts on this, Brian.
Yeah, that's one man and one company now influencing or determining the fate of 330 million people.
Exactly.
That's all it is. And that's bordering on evil and destructive to the point where I agree with you. You can't have something so big that you're now quashing out all companies. That's why we have antitrust laws, correct?
Absolutely.
So that we don't have just one company imposing their will on everybody.
On everybody else.
That's where we are.
And that's the final word on Mark and the Millennials. That's go woke or go broke. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. A special thanks to Delegate Brian Chisholm. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.